Hello everyone, welcome to my new tutorial. Today I want to show you my modular landscape version 2. It's similar to my version 1. I will put a link in the description below and in one of these info cards. But it's a different approach because in that version you can control the curve of the river and the vegetation, and the rocks and everything will automatically adapt to the path of the river. Let's have a quick look. The river is controlled with a path, which you can edit, and as you can see, the landscape automatically adapts to the path of the river, and we have control about the border of the vegetation. There is an area where is no vegetation. You can control, of course, the height of your terrain, and you can control the density of the rocks. And the rocks automatically only appear near to the path. Of course, you can control how much they spread. And we got some cool noise over the vegetation, so it looks not too uniform. So if you want to know how to create that, just watch that video. So as usual, we will start with our default cube and use it as geometry nodes container. Click on the geometry nodes panel and create a new geometry node setup. Disconnect input from output. The input we can use later on. And now, first of all, we are going to create our ground grid. Give it a size from about 25 to 25 meters. And with a resolution about 150. You can change that later on. And we will need a subdivide mesh node, so we have even more control about our grid. There it is, our ground grid. And of course, we need a material, set material. And I've already downloaded a material from my Blender Kit add-on. Maybe I can show you that. Blender Kit, search material, just type in ground, and there you got a lot of cool materials that you can just drag and drop to your scene. And I've decided to take a material that's called ground with rocks, and that's how it looks like, just a rocky material. And now that we have material, we can, maybe I switch back to a normal mode, not to render view. We will need a set position node. Now it's time to get some displacement on our grid, and therefore we will need a noise texture. By the way, that part is similar to my modular landscape tutorial number 1. So setting the noise to our landscape is similar to the first one. The difference comes when we create our river, but that will come in a few minutes. And we will need an RGB curves node. We will need a position node, a combine XYZ node, because we only want to affect the Z channel. And we will need a vector math node that is set to add. Now plug in the factor output into the color input and the color output into the Z channel, and the position goes into the upper vector of the add node, and combine XYZ into the lower one. So now we can all plug into our position node. And at the moment our scale is much too high. Maybe set it to 0.02. The details to maybe 10. roughness can you leave at 0.5 and the distortion maybe to 3. And as you can see, there's already happening something, and now with the RGB curves you can control the landscape, and with the factor you can control the height of your landscape. By the way, in my first tutorial with the version number 1, we set the height pretty high, so something like that. That will not work here with our river, because sometimes it happens that the noise extrusion gets too high, so the river is beneath our surface, so we need to set the surface pretty low. There can be no mountain or something like that, otherwise our NURBS path with our river does not work. So so before we continue, we first make some frames. Hit Ctrl J to set a frame around our noise distortion. Noise distortion, and the upper one will be the grid itself. Ctrl J, ground. And now it's time to bring on our river. And to create a river, we first will add a NURBS path. Hit Shift A and select a path. There it is. We scale it up a little bit because we want to have the river along the whole grid, and turn it around 90 degrees. That will be the path for our river, and now we'll need a plane, and the plane will be our surface for our river. Just hit Shift A and create a plane. So the plane, you have to imagine that we will use an array modifier, and the array modifier will put many small slices of our plane to a big plane together. So we will need to scale our plane a little bit, something like that maybe, and something like that. Don't forget to hit Ctrl A and apply all transforms. We will rename our plane into piece of water. And now we go into the modifier panel and we add an array modifier, and we will set that array modifier to relative offset and to merge, so that the pieces of water will be merged into one big piece of water. So what else do we need? We need a curve modifier. So we can close that, and we add a curve modifier, and the curve object will be our NURBS path. And as we can see nothing. That's because we forgot to change the path, the direction of our array. We will need the Y direction, and we can set up the count. So as you can see, it already follows the Y direction, and with the NURBS path, we can now control the direction of our river. And you can see it better here. That's our beautiful river. And if the river is too short at the end, you have to click on the piece of water and where is it? There it is, and just increase the count of your array pieces. So at the moment we can leave it like that. Back to our geometry nodes. And in the next step, we will set our distortion for our river, so that the plane, the grid will be distorted by the NURBS path, and the riverbed is going to be shown. So therefore we will need our NURBS path, and we just drag and drop it into our scene. We will need a curve to mesh node. Where is it? Curve to mesh, there it is. We will need a geometry proximity node. No, that was the wrong one. Geometry proximity, there it is. We will need a vector math node. And into that vector math node, we will plug in a position node. Vector math we can set to distance. We will need a math node that we set to multiply add. There it is. And again, we will need a combine x, y, z node, because again, we only want to affect the z channel. So now how do we now connect all these nodes? First of all, set the object info, the NURBS path, to relative, not to original, otherwise there won't be an effect, and connect the geometry with our curve to mesh node, because the geometry proximity node only works with mesh, not with the curve. That's why we have to convert it, and we plug in the mesh into the target. And now we want to calculate the distance between our NURBS path and our grid ground. Plug in the position into the upper vector, and that position from the geometry proximity into the lower input, and plug that one into value, and now that into the Z channel. And we can move that whole thing into the offset node from our set position node. And as you can see, something is happening already. At the moment, it's only distorting at one point. That's why we need to set the geometry proximity from faces to edges. And as you can see now, it's bending around the NURBS path of our river. We need to set some changes here in our multiply add node. First of all, we are going to activate clamp, and as you can see now, our river is getting more and more close to a real river. So now we got these two values here, multiplier and addend, and with these two values you can control the shape of our river. With the lower one you can control the width of your river, and that looks pretty cool. Now the only thing is that our river is still below our surface. That's because our plane was moved up from our noise distortion, and we will change that by drag and dropping our river into our scene. So we will grab the piece of water, drag and drop it into our scene, and then we will need a transform node. Again, set it to relative and activate as instance, and connect the geometry with the geometry input. We will set shade smooth, and we will set a material, and we will connect that with a join geometry node, join geometry, just like here, and plug that right into our join geometry node, and I've also prepared some water material. We will have a look at that now. And now we have control about the river position, the Z position, with our transform node. You can see now two rivers. The first one is our piece of water, the real piece of water, the plane that we have created, and the second one is the instance that we created. So now you can turn off the first one, so the real one, let's say it like that, and we now only can work with our instance. Now, to see what our material is like, I created a material plane that's somewhere far behind here, because if I drag and drop the material just into our scene, the whole geometry nodes mesh will be shown with that material. So I always use some how do you say, some temporary material plane to show you how the material looks like. And it's nothing fancy, it's just a principal shader with transmission set to 1, the roughness is set to 0, and it's almost white. And then I set a texture coordinate node with object into mapping node with a noise texture, and a bump node going into the normal. And the result you can see here. By the way, I use a sky texture node for light. I like the sky texture node because you are very flexible with the sun size. If you turn the sun size to maybe 1 or lower than 1, you get really sharp shadows. And when you turn the sun size to a value upper than 15 or 20, you get very smooth shadows, and you also can control the position of your sun and the color of your surrounding. And I don't have that these possibilities with a normal HDRI map, so I like the sky texture object, but that's only as a small notice. Back to our water material and back to our grid. So now we got some smooth water going on and a cool landscape with some variations in it. And now it's time to set the vegetation. So click on the geometry nodes object, and maybe we will group that first. Hit Ctrl J and rename it into water. So now it's time to add some grass, and for that I've already imported some assets, some rocks, flowers, dandelions, some trees, but we won't use them because the scene gets very slow with it. Some clover and some grass. So I activate the grass. It's positioned somewhere below our plane. And to import the grass, you just drag and drop the whole grass collection into our scene. First of all, we will need a distribute points on faces node. And the distribute points on faces node will be connected with our ground. So the output of our set position node goes into the input of our grass distribution points on faces node. Then of course we will need an instance on points node. There it is. Connect the points with the instances, and the collection goes into, sorry, I was just thinking it's wrong. It's not instance 2 points. I grabbed the wrong one. It's instance on points, not 2 points. Sorry for that. So points go into points and the geometry goes into instance. And be aware of when you use a collection, we have to activate separate children and pick instance. And now we can connect the instance on points node with our join geometry node, and we should see some very uniform grass. If you wonder what are these black boxes around our grass, it's to increase the work speed, the render speed. They are shown as boxes in the viewport shading mode, and to get this view, you have to click on your asset, click on object properties, and under the panel viewport display, you can change textured to bounce, and that will display the assets only as bounce and not as a textured object. Back to our geometry nodes. Now we want to have some variation in our grass, and to do that we will need a random value node. So maybe first we will range our grass along the normals of our plane. At the moment they are looking just right top to the x-axis, to the z-axis, and we want to rotate them along the normals. So to do that we will need a rotate Euler node, and we will connect that with the normal node that goes into rotation, and the output goes into the rotation of our instance on points node. And as you can see now, they are already moving along the normals, but of course we want to have some variations in the z rotation, and now we need our random value node, which we set to vector, and we increase the z value because we want to rotate them randomly around the z-axis, and maybe we can give some slight rotation around the x and y-axis, so everything looks very randomly. And how do we connect now the rotate Euler with our random value node? We will do that with another vector mask node. I hate that. You connect the rotation with the upper one, and the random value we will put into the lower one, leave it at add, and that one will go into rotation, and now everything is rotated. Maybe one was already too much, and as you can see now we have some cool randomly rotated grass that is looking into the right direction. Now when we turn up the density, you will see that it looks not very, let me increase that, it looks not very natural. Everything is also, it's a random distribution. It looks still very uniform. So we want to change that. First of all, to avoid that random looking transformation, we will add another random value node and plug that into our scale. You can copy the first one. We have to set that to float. And with the minimum factor, you can define the minimum size of your grass, maybe 0.5, and the lower one will define the maximum height of your grass. And we will put that right into our scale. And we have some beautiful noise distortion, got some beautiful scale, random scale to our grass. And what we are going to do now is to add some noise to the distribution of our grass, so it gets even more randomly than it is right now. So for that we will need a delete geometry node, and what we are going to do now is we will delete some geometry based on some noise texture. Plug the delete geometry node right between the Z position node of your ground and the distribution on points on faces node of our grass. And what it does is it deletes everything that we see. And to undelete our grass, we will need a noise texture and a color ramp. Plug in the factor into the factor and the color output into our selection of our delete geometry node. Now we have to make our noise a little bit smaller, maybe something 0.8. And now we have control with our color ramp over the distribution of our grass. So that looks, I think, more naturally than the first attempt. And because I think in a normal nature scene, there is no grass everywhere. Certainly not in a rock nature scene. So we have now control about the size of the gaps between our grass. That could look cool too, but I think we will leave it at 0.5. With the distortion, it gets even more distorted or more randomly, and as we increase the distortion, we get nearer to the picture that we had at the beginning that we want to avoid. So don't push up the distortion too high, maybe something like that. So that looks pretty randomly. So what we also got to do is we want to have some kind of vegetation border around our river, so that the grass does not begin to grow right at the edge of our land river. So we want to have some controllable free space, and to do that we go back to our NURBS path. First of all, I think we're going to create a new frame. That will be our grass frame. And that one will be our NURBS path. So to influence now the vegetation border with our NURBS path, we will do the same as we did with our noises, with our ground and our NURBS path. And to influence now the grass with our NURBS path, we will need a math node that we set to multiply add, and we will need another random value node that we can leave at float. And now we connect the output from our distance with the value input, and the random value goes into the multiplier. And now we have to change the random values, maybe something like that. And we will need a combine X, Y, Z node. And we now connect the, first of all, don't forget to activate clamp. And now we plug the value into our Z channel. and the Z channel goes right into the selection input of our instance on points node. So now we should be able to control the border of our grass vegetation, and as you can see here, it's working. Maybe I set that to the not rendered view. It's a bit faster. So with that control here, you can change the proximity from the vegetation to our NURBS path. Maybe you can rename that from multiply add to vegetation border. That makes it a little bit clearer. And with the minimum and the max value of the random node, you can control the sharpness of the vegetation edge. So maybe something like that. That looks pretty normal, I think. And the cool thing is now, whenever you change the NURBS path, the vegetation automatically will adapt and grow and will be erased at certain points. So you got some pretty cool river and some vegetation. Now it's time to set the rocks inside our river. And how do we create that? Well, we will make a similar approach as we did here with our grass, but in the opposite direction. Maybe we will put a frame around that too. Hit Control J, and we will name that Vegetation Border Control. And now we can copy these two and we will use that for our rocks. But first of all, we are going to import some of our rocks. I've already created a rocks collection. By the way, I've downloaded these rocks also from BlenderKit. You can download here a ton of free assets. When you type in rocks, you get a ton of rocks. Because I am subscribed to BlenderKit, everything is free now, but I know that at least half of all the rocks are totally free assets. You only have to subscribe to BlenderKit. I will leave a link in the description below where you get a 10% discount when you subscribe to BlenderKit, but that's totally up to you. I can only recommend that add-on because you can download thousands of models and materials, and the materials are all for free. You just have to drag and drop that into your scene. So it's a really cool add-on. But anyways, we want to make some rocks. I've already imported some rocks, and we just drag and drop rocks into our scene. I think I will move them under our grass. And again, we will need a distribute points on faces node. We will connect that with our ground output. We will need an instance on, no, the wrong one again. Instance on points node. So we connect the points with our points and the geometry with the instance. Don't forget to activate separate children and reset children and pick instance, and we can connect that with our join geometry node. And now we got some rocks all over our meadow. Of course, we want to place our rocks inside the water. So how do we do that? We have here our vegetation border control. We can make a group and rename that into river rocks control, and again we will need the output from the distance. And we will plug that into our value, and again we will need a combine x, y, z node that will go right into our selection. And now we can connect the vegetation, the river box control with our combine x, y, z channel, and we got rocks outside our water. Now, how do we invert that? That's pretty simple. We just add another math node, and we set this math node to multiply -1, so it's just the opposite direction, and we will plug that right between our vegetation border, or maybe we can call that now rocks border. And we have to change the multiply add to only add, because we only added we add the rocks along the curve of our NURBS path. And as you can see now, we already get some cool distribution of our rocks, and now you can play with the values. With the lower one, you distribute the rocks on the land, and rocks are also inside the water. So now the rest is just copy and paste. Of course, we want to give the rocks some random value in the rotation. Make that a vector. And we have some beautiful rotation. Copy that, change that to float, and put it into the scale. Now you can control the minimum size and the maximum size of your water rocks. Maybe we group that and rename that into river rocks. And as you can imagine, the rest is just copy and paste. I will turn off the grass again. The rest is just copy and paste. You can download some assets, maybe from BlenderKit, or you can create some of your own. Just drag and drop them into your scene, and just copy the grass nodes if you want to have some vegetation on the land, or you copy the river rocks nodes if you want to have some assets inside the water. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial and everything works for you. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to write something into the comments. I will answer as quickly as I can. So hopefully I see you in the next tutorial. Bye.